Okay guys, now we start with the first video, equipment. What do we actually need for the hyperlapse, and what tools can we use to generate and produce this hyperlapse as clean as possible? First topic, camera. In this course, we shoot with the Sony Alpha 7 III and the Sony A7 III, which is very good for hyperlapse because it offers a lot of megapixels. It's really important to have at least 12 megapixels because even if we want to produce a full HD output, we need all these pixels to ensure a reasonable stabilization process. The programs all run much better when we have more pixel information, which of course gives us a much better result. The second issue is the lens. We are now shooting in a range from 16mm to 200mm. My recommendation for beginners is to stay in the 24-50 range and try out different ranges and then later on take detail shots of certain objects with 135 or even 200mm. But it's advisable to stay in the range 24-50 and to practice and see how the focal lengths affect the hyperlapse. It's known that the bigger the angle of view, i.e. the smaller the focal length, I'm talking about 16mm, the more errors we have in the picture. Such optics tend to have distortions at the edges of the image and therefore sources of error can get into the hyperlapse. In the end, that leads to jerking, so remember, avoid 16mm, only use them if you're really trained, know your way around and feel safe. Next topic, also extremely important, the filtration. What filters do we have that help us to get a better picture? On the one hand, we work with the ND filter, but on the other hand, we also work with the polarizing filter. The polarizing filter absorbs the polarized radiation for us, so we have more contrast in the sky. The ND filter, with which we can down the image and thus we get more control over the camera settings, which is of course valuable if we want to work with higher exposure times or use the aperture open. Another important topic for us is the storage media and the batteries. This means that we should definitely check these two things again before the production, if we have enough storage space and of course enough battery life during production so that we won't have any problems there. Before you start with the production, think about the following. How many pictures do I want to take? How long should the hyperlapse be? Another important point is how much time do we spend at the location? Think about that in any case. Calculate it in your head. Calculate the interval of the pictures plus the number of pictures, then you will get seconds and know how long you have to stay at the location. Next part, also very important, the interval meter. I like to work with the interval meter because not all cameras have an internal interval mode. That's why it's always better to work with an interval meter. We can make the settings even more precise. We can adjust loops, we can put the delays in, and that is of course much more pleasant to work with. It's also important that we definitely work with an interval mode and don't trigger it manually, because this can of course cause problems with the time display. If we release the shutter manually, we press the shutter button after 5 seconds or 8 seconds, which causes jerkiness that we don't want to have in the sky at all. We want to have a continuous movement of the clouds, and therefore it's advisable to always work with an interval meter. Whether internal or external is irrelevant, but this is a very important tool. Another tool that we can use is the monopod. I like to use this model from Manfrotto, but we can also work with a tripod. It's the main method we will focus on. A tripod gives the cleanest shots and we can work with the exposure time, which is very important. We can't do that with the other methods. When we film handheld, with the monopod, or even the gimbal, the possibilities are not as open to us as with the tripod version. But I'll explain all the advantages and disadvantages of the tripods in the third video. Then, another very important tool, something that I always use in combination with the tripod, is the geared head. It's this device. With the geared head, we have the possibility to adjust all rotation axes separately, which is of course extremely important when we have a fixed point in the image that we want to aim at in every picture. This part is very, very important there. Some things that are also very, very important when it comes to equipment are not only the objects that are now lying haptically on the table, but also the programs we use on the computer. We work with the program LRT Timelapse. This program is free of charge within a certain range, which is also completely sufficient for our purposes. With this, we work on the hyperlapses and also structure our folders. A second tool is Lightroom, with which we also do the color correction. We will use this program to generate a color look and then apply it to all images. Later in the Lightroom, we will convert our RAW files into JPEGs or PNGs in order to have an easier workflow in After Effects. After Effects will be the third tool we will use. With it, we will do the stabilization and tracking, and we will add some effects to the image that I will show you later. Finally, I have 3 additional tools that I like to use. Probably very unusual for some people, but I can explain to you what they are good for. For example, I always have a piece of chalk with me, because then we can mark places and locations where we don't have any other markers. We can measure distances with our feet, so we always have an equal distance of the position in our hyperlapse. This is also extremely important. You should always have a piece of chalk with you. A second tool which I like to use and which I would recommend to everybody is the spirit level. It looks like this and is available in different versions. This one here has 2 vials. There are also 3 vials for all 3 axes of rotation. That would be sufficient for what we're planning. This level is extremely important because we have a gyrometer in the camera, but this gyrometer is not as precise as this spirit level. The gyrometer in the camera works with electronic sensors, and they simply do not give such an accurate picture of the horizontal alignment of the camera as this does. Therefore, it's very, very important to get the roll axis under control later on, which is a very difficult issue with hyperlapse. Last but not least, I present you an auxiliary tool. I wouldn't say it's the most important one, but if you plan to create radial movements and radial hyperlapse, for example, around a statue, then you should definitely get a rope. This is a 25-meter rope. I always make a small knot on this rope after a certain distance. It's always the same, so now we have a tool where we can measure the distance and always guarantee the same distance in our hyperlapse. You can also, as already mentioned, use the rope to draw very nice radii or circles around objects to have always the same distance from the object. This is also an important tool when we make radial hyperlapse or hyperlapse around objects. That was it with our equipment. I hope you now have a good overview of the things we need and the things that are necessary to generate a good hyperlapse. You can find the whole equipment and of course the tools like the spirit level or the geared head on the page. See you in the second video with the settings.